Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time you're looking at this video. This is the final class for personal finance, and I'm Professor Suarez, bringing you some important and relevant information on your personal finances. So let's go ahead and get started. So today, I'm going to just briefly go over some of the key things that we're going to be needing to wrap up, right? So 2 chapters coming up this last week. Chapter 8 and Chapter 11. What I'm going to need you to do is read the chapters, and review for a final exam will also be up. Use the book and the review that I'm putting up to get yourselves prepared for that final exam. At that point, once you finish up studying, give yourself some space by completing your final project outline and final project and handing that in, and make up any other work that you need to get in. If you have any quizzes that you haven't done, please email me, because this is the last week that you'll have the opportunity to do so. And then take the final exam, and then you should be done with the course. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started talking about the important material that I want to cover today, right? So this being the last class, I'm trying to wrap up some of the things that we learned about, right? So in previous classes we talked about income and expense. We focus more on expense because of the fact that as far as income, those things could change from year to year, from month to month, or even, from presidency term to presidency term with the different regulations that they put forth. So what I'm trying to cover today is some of the key concepts that might influence the way we approach our income and accruing income, right? Take, for example, this assumption here. The assumption that America has a far more superior and advanced economy due to higher levels of education and the concentration of how many people have a higher education, right? Was this always the case in America? The reality is no, it wasn't. As years progressed, more and more people were expected to graduate college. But why? Why is that? You ask anybody, if you're going to have a successful career or have a 6-figure income, you have to have a college degree. But it wasn't always like this. In the early 90s, you could find a decent job with just a high school degree. And in most cases, a lot of the learning and experience you got was on the job. The training was on site, because the positions required you to have specific knowledge about the things that you were doing on the job, right? Even today, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who uses even 20% of what they learned in college. And the reality is, a higher education doesn't correlate to a higher GDP and productivity. And GDP, if you remember, is gross domestic product. This is the amount that America produces. So you'd imagine that if more and more people are graduating college and there's a higher concentration of educated people in the population, that would correlate to more production, more productivity, more asset and more wealth development in the country. The reality is that's far from the case. In the instance of inequality, inequality has actually risen in the United States. And I'm not saying that that's because of education, but what I'm saying is, it'd be a very difficult thing to prove that a higher education will result in higher productivity and higher wealth development. But what it has caused is degree inflation, right? So when I graduated high school, which was about 2007, it was people said, in order to get a decent job, you need to get a degree. But it's kind of like the example, and this was given from the book 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. If you're watching a show and the people in the front row say, in order to get a better view, I'm going to stand up, then that requires the people in the row behind them to have to stand up to get a good view. And then by the end of the show, everybody's standing up. And the reality is nobody has a better view. It's just now everybody's legs hurt and they have the same view. Same thing with a college degree. There are so many people now with a college degree, and a bachelor's degree or an associate's, it's going to get to the point where eventually, in order to get a decent job, you're going to have to get your master's degree. And that's unfortunate because, with the amount of student debt that's out there, the last thing you want to do is inflate the value of education by giving everyone a college degree or requiring that everyone has a college degree for a job that doesn't pay the appropriate amount of what you've taken out in student debt or taken out in time and effort, right? So what's the value of college then? According to the corporate entities, the value of college is really in its ability to filter good candidates. And at that, I don't mean the best candidates, I mean good, decent candidates, right? Because what does a college degree tell your employer? It tells them that you're competent enough to be reliable, to finish whatever it is you set your mind to, and also that you're able to learn whatever it is that's needed to be learned for the sake of a class or a course or a job, right? But there should be better, more cost-effective ways to do this, right? That's why many people go into trade schools, and people coming out of certain trade schools and certain careers, like careers in the steel industry, are making $50,000 coming out. So imagine going to school for a year and a half, and then upon graduation making $50,000, versus some college graduates that only make $30,000 to $45,000 after they graduate. And if they were able to find a job in their industry. I know people that, I gave an example of one friend who, they have their own business, but they're working at a gas station with a master's degree, right? And I'm not saying that it happens right away. For every $10,000 you want to earn, it's going to take about a month of looking and researching for the job that you want. So that is something to take into consideration. With regards to your education, right? That's why it's an important aspect of the final project to really research how much is it that you're going to make as a career. Because if you're going to be taking the time, the effort, and the money to get into this position, and there's an easier way to do it, why not go ahead and do that? With that being said, there's another aspect that also affects, it's outside of your control, that affects your income and upward mobility, and that's regulation and deregulation. This is just a term used to identify the things that go on in politics and some of the policies that our politicians and our senators and House of Representatives take up in order to influence or impact the market, right? So the specific ones that really touch upon what money you make are regulations that affect the job market and the job industry. But there are other different regulations like immigration reform, tariffs, and deals that are made with other countries, trade deals that can impact your job opportunities and your income as well for many different reasons, right? Which that would require another class to get into. But some of the key concept or the general idea that you want to understand is that this is a necessary evil, right? If you watch Bloomberg channel, or if you read the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, there may be a sense that free market and capitalism is the best approach to helping everyone that's involved in the job market reach their financial goals, because it allows people to be entrepreneurial and to be able to successfully fulfill their dreams and aspirations. And if you work hard enough, you'll be able to become wealthy and affluent, right? But there lies something, or there lies an assumption really, where if you work hard, right, and you're in this environment, that it's guaranteed that you're going to be wealthy and affluent. But the reality is a free market, right? Which the name is kind of misleading, and it implies that there are no limitations, no rules. You can do whatever you want. If you could dream it, you can do it, right? A free market only works properly when there are guidelines and limitations that allow it to run effectively and efficiently. And what do I mean by this? Right? So take, for example, child labor laws. Nobody really disagrees with the fact that children should not be working in factories, right? Yet a free market, or someone who believes in a free market, would say the firm's right and ability to hire whoever they want should not be infringed upon by the government. However, if you take the lives and the opportunities and the potential of the children into account, and how detrimental it would be that they're not able to learn and they are required to work, that severely outweighs the rights of the firms and the companies, right? And we've heard this example before, but that's a part of the regulation that goes into free markets and allows it to really think about the long term versus the short term, right? So there are regulations that allow companies, or I'm sorry, that don't allow companies to misuse their resources. So take, for example, green initiatives or initiatives about the environment. In the short run, it might be more expensive for a company to find cleaner alternatives to burning coal or gas, or it might be detrimental to their company's revenue to be limited in how many resources they could use in the environment, right? But in the long run, it helps the market because it ensures that we have resources in an environment that's clean enough for us to live in and to populate, right? And it improves the welfare and the living conditions of the people and the environment around the companies or the firms that are working in those cities and centers of business. So regulation in the long run is a good thing. But if you listen to free market economists or even some Republicans, they'll tell you that whenever the government gets involved, it ruins things. It's not good for the economy. And they'll say things that like, taxes, for example, limit business because the profits that could be reinvested into the company for what is known as a trickle-down effect are being taken away by the government, right? But there needs to be a balance, right? Optimal markets function with regulations, and in the short run capacity, sure, they're losing revenue because they're paying these taxes, but in the long run, when it comes to the benefits of the people, the employees, their welfare, right? Taxes provide a great service because they're used to pay for schooling, for police officers to regulate crime, for hospitals, for all these things that improve the quality of life of people, right? So with that being said, finding that balance is really what we have to strive for, right? And as an employee or a future CEO, you have to take that into account. Maybe there needs to be some regulations, or we need to consider some regulations that incentivize the assumptions that we make, right? Sure, education is very important to be successful and to achieve wealth, but what kind of education? Why can't there be regulation where you have multiple firms required to train all their employees on specific skills needed for the industry, right? And I mean, there's the reason that might backfire, why some firms might not want to train their employees, is because they fear that these employees will be taken away from other companies, and putting all this money and investment and time into an employee for them to leave to another company, it's a waste. It seems like a waste of money to them. But if the whole industry is required to be trained on a minimal level, that improves the quality of the employee, as well as removes that fear that if you lose one of your employees, you won't be able to find another employee in the market, right? So in the short run, the company might feel, you know what, this is a bad idea, we don't want to do this, but in the long run, it improves the industry. And it's a regulation that, when imposed, incentivizes the education and improves the productivity, right? Because for you as an employee, instead of paying for a college degree or a college education, which may cost on average $30,000 to $40,000, the cost is fronted by a company that has millions of dollars in the capacity to do so. And this is some of the regulation that you want to see versus just free college or free education, right? Because again, it's not about everybody having a degree, because what does that really do? As we said before, it's degree inflation. What we really need are regulations and deregulations, or cases where we're removing regulation, removing limits on these companies, so that way we have more opportunities to income and more opportunities to better training, and also the ability to really strike a balance on the demands of the firm, the companies that we work for, and the demands of the employees and our welfare. So I want to step back from regulation for a little bit and talk about something that's more in our control, ourselves, right? And based on an article that I read by Patrick Allen, there's the idea that there's not one self that we view ourselves, or one lens that we view ourselves under, but there are three, right? Our reality, our responsibilities, which we could refer to as the odd self, and the ideals and the dreams and aspirations that we hold ourselves to, right? And all these things play a huge role in our lives, but at the end of our lives, the biggest source of regret comes from not what you would expect. It comes from the ideal self. And maybe some of you are saying, of course, if you failed to reach your goals, that's going to cause regret, right? But that's not what the study's importance comes in. It really comes in to the fact that these things never go away. And what I mean by that is, if you have dreams, if you have aspirations, if you have things that you want to achieve, the fact that you're having a child, or that you have to move away to a different state, or the type of job you have, right? Or the type of career you take up, or the kind of education you have, all those things, right? No matter what it is you decide to do, that's not going to change the fact that what you want, what you individually want for your life, never truly goes away. So how can you take this and apply it to yourself, right? And make it into a positive, right? There may be some of you out there that can remember or recall that when you were a kid, and when they asked you, what do you want to be when you grow up? You said an astronaut, a doctor, a lawyer, an artist, right? And today you find yourself studying a career that's completely different. In your mind, completely different, right? But I would challenge that, because there might be some aspect of those things that you want to become when you were younger that you find now in your career, right? Take, for example, me personally, I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a singer, a songwriter, which I still do on the side, but that's not my career. That's not where I get most of my income, right? And the aspect that I liked about it was the ability to connect with people and to create stuff. So as an online course professor, I create content on a regular basis, and I use my skills, my ability to create, to develop content and design courses, which I enjoy greatly, right? I also wanted to become a teacher. Did I want to become an online teacher? I didn't know that. I didn't know that I was going to be developing content online, but lo and behold, the opportunity presented itself, and I enjoy it. I enjoy teaching the courses, developing content, creating. Sure, there are some aspects that are tedious, but the fact that I'm able to do what I want versus do what I have to, right, ensures that I'm not in a place of regret. I'm not in a place where I'm disenfranchised, or where I feel like I'm working paycheck to paycheck. I work on my schedule, on my time, and I do what I want. And I'm fully motivated and inspired with every class and every course that I do. And I feel like that's the best way to work, because I've been in scenarios where I'm doing something that I think I want to do, and I regret every moment of it, and I hate every moment of it. But it doesn't change the fact that I still make the most of it, right? And this is where you have to strike a balance, right? You have to strike a balance between your ideals and your responsibilities. Sure, I could have been that musician and I could have been playing music out in the street, but would I have been able to provide for my family, for my wife, for my future kid on the way? Probably not. Am I going to live a life of regret? Am I going to say at the end of my life, man, I wish I had pursued music more? No, because I still do the music. I still do what I want. And in the book, The 50 Ways to Get a Job, an unconventional guide talks about that the fact of the matter is most success is not found in a linear path where you go to school, you get a job, you get a break, you become rich. It happens unlinearly, and often it's a web of different jobs and careers and fields that you get into, right? Because what you want, or you as an individual, it's not straightforward. It's not, a one size fits all. Everybody's different. Everybody's unique. Every skill set is different and unique. And in order for you to optimize your capacity, you have to find ways to find jobs and opportunities that fit your style. And when you don't do that, when there is that disconnect, just simply to fulfill an ought self, right? And sure, you could fulfill all your responsibilities and your requirements of what everybody expects of you, but you won't be happy. I guarantee you won't be happy, right? And it's not because of the model. The model does a good way to illustrate, the model of the three selves does a good job at illustrating what it is that's, I guess, going on in our minds. But the reality is we have aspirations and dreams that we want to strive for. And whether that's a 9-to-5 job or something else, we can't limit ourselves to just the reality. We have to take some risks. We have to go out there and do things that may in fact not be in our best interest in the short run, like go to school or get a degree or apply for a job that we may not get, right? But that's a part of life, and that's a part of the success. Maybe we have to fail a couple times, but you won't regret it because you are doing your very best and you're taking action. The precursor to regret is inaction, the article says. So let's go ahead and get active and do what we have to do to improve our personal finance, to improve our income, and to improve ourselves. Some tips that you could take away, right, from 50 Ways to Get a Job is they say you need a network. So network. Go out, meet people. Go to a networking event about the career that you want to do and ask them, what was it that you did to get to where you're at? Try to meet your future boss. Talk to people who have the ability to hire and influence and create opportunities, and ask them, how did you get to that place? Maybe that's what you want for your life, to be able to impact somebody else's life, to give back to your community. The second suggestion is you need to do things for free. And this might seem contradictory on how to get a job, but if you find something that you're willing to do for free and you enjoy, then when you realize that this is what you want to do for the rest of your life, you can figure out how to get paid for it. And let me tell you, working 80 hours in education is, for me, much more rewarding and much more fun than working 80 hours at a bank or 80 hours in a classroom or 80 hours on a construction site, right? But that's a part of the passion that comes with doing what you want to do, right? And the third is here's another suggestion: figure out how to do that thing and get paid for it, right? because it's one thing to do it for free, but it's another thing to kind of to get some revenue for something that you love. And finally, interview some people who have attained a level of success that you would wish to achieve. Now, if you're networking and you're meeting different people, there's going to be one or two people that you're going to want to know more about. The challenge is to not let them tell their story linearly, like how they went from their odd self to their ideal self, because it doesn't happen that way, right? It's a web. And take time to take note of the things that are exceptional or even incidental, because those are aspects that might have impacted their life in a tremendous way. And if you could either recreate that in your own life or even find that in your own life, that's another sign or another pointer to get you closer to that ideal self that everyone in life is striving to get towards. But last but not least, and this isn't from the book, you have to act now. Like right now. Like, you know, not sitting here and just, you know, going on YouTube, looking up some other videos. No, you have to go out and do what you need to do now. Make a decision to do something that you could do in the next 5 seconds, 5 minutes, or even now, right now. If you have to text somebody, hey, I want to meet up for some coffee, let's talk. Or you have to contact your parents, hey, is there somebody you know that's in this industry? But make the decision to do it right now, because every moment counts. And with that being said, we get into a very tricky subject, which is investments, right? And the reason I say that it's tricky is because you can make different kinds of investments. You can make an investment in yourself by paying for your education or taking out student loans to pay for a college education. You could invest time in a company by working for them, and the hope is that they pay you appropriately for the work that you put and the value that you add to that company, right? These are all investments, but the specific investments that we talk about in the books are investments in assets, right? And they highlight that there are firms or investment banks that allow you to do this. Some of the familiar ones that come to mind are the commercial investment banks like Merrill Lynch, Fidelity, Vanguard, and these are all companies or firms that allow you to use their resources to make investments, right? And the benefits of using a firm is they have methods, they have theories, they have capital and professionals that they have access to. And the thing that I want you to understand is that investments under these firms can still fail, right? And the reason that I say this up front is because just because you go through a firm, there's no guarantee that you're going to make money, because it's risk. Risk has aspect of loss inherently in it, and that's where the risk comes in. So your risk is substantially reduced by going through these firms, but only if you understand the investments that you're going into. Now, if you decide you don't want to go through the firms, there are some tools and resources that an individual, you as a person, can take to research. And the benefit of you as an individual using these resources and investing yourself is you have the time to research and can invest in your own company or your own business that you want to start up. So that is an idea that also comes in with investment that the book does not talk about, but I do believe it's very important, especially with my entrepreneurial background, right? The top 3 investments, according to Investopedia, that I want to talk about are index funds, which are mutual funds, right, which we're going to talk about next, or a basket of funds that are tied to an index or a group of stocks and bonds and equity and assets, right? So a big example, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is the S&P 500 index fund, which is tied to the top 500 companies on the stock exchange. Then you have ETFs, which are electronically traded funds, and mutual funds. And ETFs are funds that match a type of stock, right? But allow you to invest in a portion of that stock versus the whole stock. So you could buy Apple stock, or You could buy General Electric stock, which could be sometimes in the hundreds of dollars, but buy a portion of it because they have a fund that mirrors the performance of that stock, right? Then you have mutual funds, which are a basket of different investments and assets that are pooled together and are invested in those, and you can invest in those stocks or a portion of those stocks for a portion of the price, right? And the benefits of this is that it allows you to invest in more expensive assets without having the amount of capital to do so, right? The other advantage of using ETFs or mutual funds is in most cases they're diversified, which means that when one asset or one investment goes up, the other investment's value goes down, right? And some people might be thinking, why would you want to make money and lose money at the same time? Well, the chances are that if you lose money, right, and another one of your investments is going up, the amount of money that you lose is substantially less, right? And the hope is that the money that's going up is more than what you're losing. But the problem with that is if you lose money, you lose less. But if you make money, you make less when it's diversified, right? So one other investment that's very high in the investment cycle that we could always take advantage of is lending, microloans, or giving money to somebody at a rate of interest. You'll probably get a higher return for that investment, right? I know in the Latin community we do something called la loteria, which is you draw a number, and then what it is it's like it's a pool where you draw a number and then you get whatever it is that the group is paying into it. So if you have 5 people in the group and they're paying $100, then the person who draws number 1 gets paid $500, and the next month you pay $100, and that pool of 100 that everybody's paying goes to the person who drew number 2. The next month the same thing, and that's a form of lending in itself. But what people tend to do with those things is they'll pay off all their credit cards, or they'll buy something that they really want to get. And the ability to be able to finance something with people you trust could open the opportunities and open the doors for a lot of other opportunities. So those are the top 3 investments that people tend to make, right? The other kind of investments that you have, which are tied to retirement, are 401k and pensions, right? And we already know what 401k and pensions are because we went over it before. But they're pretty much vehicles that are allowing you to save for retirement. But some of the risks associated with these vehicles is that most investments are determined by the last 10 years of your portfolio performance, which means if any of the following risk happens: poor decisions, borrowing expenses are beyond your control, you get a divorce, or the market has a downturn within the last 10 years of your investment, that could pretty much determine what kind of retirement that you're going to have. But there's ways to avoid these risks, right? Like if for divorce, you could always get a prenuptial agreement, right? For debt or your borrowing expenses, controlling the debt and how you borrow your money. Poor decisions as far as your investments are concerned. Make sure that you do your research and you don't invest in anything that you don't understand. And bad market, you could always diversify, but chances are if you're losing, everybody else is losing. So there really isn't any protection against being invested in a bad market except, well, not investing in it, right? But in most cases, 401k and pensions, you're going to be invested in something. There are also regulations that go along with investment that protect you as a consumer, right? So things like the SEC protect investors as well as hold them to the fiduciary standard. The New York Stock Exchange, in order to be a company that's posted on the New York Stock Exchange, there's a whole lot of policies and procedures that go into becoming a publicly traded company. So you have every guarantee in knowing that any company that's on the stock exchange has a history or trajectory that is upholded to the highest standard, and you know that if you're investing in it, you're investing in an actual company, not some made up company with no assets or no name to it, to its value. Banks also give access to free information and free courses. This is probably the most cost-effective way for a bank to give information to its customers versus training a whole bunch of employees and being required to train a whole bunch of employees. But all this information is easily accessible and free. So take advantage of Merrill Lynch. I think they have some stuff. Fidelity might have some things online. Vanguard might also have some courses that you could take as well. Now remember that most markets do not guarantee returns, especially equity markets. So these are stocks, bonds, treasury bonds. These are all equity because they're assets, right? There's no get rich quick scheme. So anybody who tells you that you could get rich off of the stock market or forex, foreign exchange rates, or even real estate, right? There's no get rich quick scheme. It's all work, it's research, and you have to do your due diligence, right? There's no glide path. So a lot of retirement investments will tell you that, oh, you could invest in this life path mutual fund that's passively invested in stocks. So it invests aggressively in the beginning, and then towards closer to your retirement, it goes into risk-free or less riskier investments, right? And what it does is it tries to reduce the cost. So this may seem like a good investment, but in some cases, if you research it and you see that their investments or the things that they are investing in don't reflect what is recommended or what you feel are good investments for the time that we're in, they might not be the best approach. And again, glide paths return are not guaranteed. There are no investments that are guaranteed. And if somebody is guaranteeing it, you might want to look into how they're going to back up that guarantee. Are they insured by SIPC, or are they just talking out of their ass, you know? And finally, there are no investments that protect in downturn, right? So take, for example, the S&P 500. The top 500 companies has an average return, right? It's a return of 11%. Within the last year, it only had a return of 2.2%. So historic success does not guarantee future success. So just because you invest in something that has a high return, there's no guarantee that the next year you're going to get a high return as well. So actively invested funds, things that are constantly moved, may be more expensive, but they reduce the risk of loss. And losing a couple of dollars just for buying and selling stock versus losing a lot of money and keeping it there is probably the better alternative. So with that being said, some of the key takeaways that I want you to take away from the last class is, in order to strive towards the ideal life you want, you have to do things now while you have the opportunity to do so. Live a life worth living and not one filled with regret. You cannot make excuses for what you control. So understand that the politics and the economy don't have the deciding factor on your upward mobility. They don't determine what you will be when you grow up, right? But understanding the politics and the economy can give you a tempered, realistic approach towards your financial success. And we're really reviewing what it is that has helped people up until this point to get to where they're going to go, right? The second thing is investment of resources and time can be creative and fruitful, and they don't require you to go through the conventional methods because the conventional methods are not guaranteed. It's a matter of what risk you're willing to take and what rewards are offered. And lastly, holding account managers to a fiduciary standards are what ensure that you get the most out of your assets. And there are laws and regulations that require them to do so. There are risk-free alternatives that do not give a high return, but protect you against losses in the long run. And these risk-free returns are 10-year treasury bills, 3-year treasury bills, or bonds, 10-year treasury bonds, 3-year treasury bonds, municipal bonds. These are all bonds that are tied into the government. And the reason that they're risk-free is because the assumption is that if the government needs more money, it could either charge more tax or sell some assets that they have to make up for it. The government will never run out of money. That's the assumption. But lastly, the least risk-free, the lowest risk is usually the one that has the lowest return too. With that being said, I think I've talked enough. It's been a pleasure teaching you guys and talking about some of these aspects that I feel are important in personal finance. And I hope that you've been able to take away something from this course. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to email me. If you need to open up the quiz that you haven't completed, get in contact with me immediately. Make sure you do your project outline and also your final project. Again, this is Professor Suarez. Have a great summer, and thank you for your time. Take care.